When Joe Rogan, a man whose conversations swing from stand-up comedy to philosophy, from martial arts to UFO reports, first sat across from Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb to discuss Oumuamua in 2017, he leaned forward with the same mix of childlike curiosity and sharp skepticism that has made his podcast the world's biggest microphone for weird questions. And what he heard that day stunned him. An object, long and thin, tumbling silently through space, the first interstellar visitor ever. Confirmed, moving too strangely to be a rock, accelerating without a visible tail, gliding past the sun in ways that gravity alone could not explain. And Rogan, with that familiar mix of doubt and fascination, asked the question everyone wanted to ask. So, you're saying this thing acted like a comet, but didn't look like a comet? And Loeb, calm and steady, admitted that yes, the evidence pointed towards something unusual, something possibly artificial, a word rarely uttered by scientists on the record. And from that moment Rogan became a sort of cultural conduit, not an astrophysicist himself, but a voice that mirrored what millions of ordinary people felt: shock, intrigue, and an uneasy thrill at the possibility that our solar system had just been brushed by something not entirely natural. Years passed. Oumuamua slipped beyond telescopes. Borisov followed as the second interstellar visitor, a more typical comet that soothed some nerves, and the debates about aliens, probes, and interstellar rocks faded into the background of Rogan's sprawling show. Until now, until 2025, when astronomers announced the arrival of 3I our Atlas, and the story no longer felt like a one-off anomaly, but a pattern, a chain, a sequence that forced both scientists and skeptics to sit up straighter. At first, Rogan treated it lightly, just another strange visitor drifting through space. But then came the numbers, and the mood shifted. Atlas wasn't a fragment like Oumuamua. It wasn't even a modest comet like Borisov. It was possibly 4 to 6 kilometers across, a city-sized mass hurtling through our neighborhood, 1,000,000 times heavier than Borisov, bigger than some of Earth's most notorious asteroids. And suddenly Rogan's tone changed. He leaned back, his usual smirk fading, and admitted, aloud, that this felt different, unsettling, unnerving, because a rock that large doesn't just visit by accident. It carries implications of cosmic rarity, of statistical impossibility, of something fundamentally out of place. And his audience noticed instantly. Clips of that conversation spread like wildfire, not because Rogan was funny, but because he wasn't, because he sounded genuinely rattled, and that struck harder than any punchline, because here was the everyman of curiosity admitting that the universe had thrown something onto the stage that even he didn't know how to joke about. The science only made it stranger. Comets, as every textbook shows, should warm as they approach the sun, shedding water vapor and dust, sprouting long glowing tails. But Atlas defied those rules, showing no water, no dust, no traditional tail, only a faint symmetrical halo of carbon dioxide gas, as if it were wrapped in its own invisible shroud. And astronomers admitted openly that this was unprecedented, that no comet ever studied had behaved this way. Add to that its trajectory, not a random slash across the solar system as statistics would suggest, but a path eerily aligned with the orbital plane where the planets circle the sun. A coincidence with odds of about 1 in 500, neat enough to make even cautious scientists raise eyebrows, neat enough for Avi Loeb to point out that chance may not be the only explanation. And here Rogan's gift becomes clear. He doesn't leap to wild conclusions. He doesn't shout about aliens. He does something subtler, more powerful. He pauses. He admits unease. He asks what if. And in that pause millions of listeners hear their own thoughts reflected. Because if Atlas is natural, it forces us to rewrite cosmic probabilities, to accept that giant interstellar objects are far more common than models predict, to reconsider the chemistry of distant planetary systems where carbon dioxide halos replace icy water tails, to grapple with the idea that the cosmos routinely sends city-sized messengers through our skies. And if it isn't natural, if the alignment, the size, the silence, and the strangeness add up to something more deliberate, then the implications grow heavier. That probes, artifacts, or constructs might already be slipping past our sun while we argue on Earth about budgets and politics, that interstellar visitors might not all be random, and that our first clear hints of extraterrestrial technology may not come in the form of glowing saucers or dramatic landings, but in the quiet, steady movement of something that pretends to be a rock. Rogan, ever the skeptic, keeps his tone balanced, but his very unease amplifies the mystery. Because if he, a man exposed to every conspiracy, every UFO claim, every extraordinary guest, admits that Atlas feels different, then the story carries weight beyond niche science journals. It bleeds into mainstream consciousness, into the way ordinary people talk about space at dinner tables, into the way Reddit threads spiral late at night, into the way governments begin to take quiet notice. And so the conversation grows. What is Atlas really? What lies beneath its thin veil? Is it rocky, icy, metallic, or something we cannot categorize? Will Mars orbiters in 2025 reveal a surface that answers questions or deepens them? And what does it mean for us, for our species, when the mysteries Rogan muses about over microphones are mirrored by mysteries astronomers themselves cannot explain? Because here is the truth. The unease isn't about aliens per se. It's about the erosion of certainty, the slow collapse of our comfort in thinking the universe plays by neat rules, the realization that sometimes reality is stranger than fiction, stranger than podcasts, stranger even than the wildest speculation. Atlas is here, immense, glowing oddly, flying where it shouldn't, breaking the patterns we thought were universal. And Joe Rogan's voice, skeptical, curious, unsettled, becomes the soundtrack of how millions of us process that truth, because it doesn't take belief to admit unease, it doesn't take conspiracy to admit strangeness, it only takes honesty to say what Rogan said in that moment. Yeah, this feels different. And maybe that honesty is the most important reaction of all, because it reminds us that the universe doesn't need our permission to surprise us, and that the next surprise may already be on its way. When Joe Rogan leans back in his chair, laughs nervously, and throws out a line like, "If this thing is designed to come by and take a look," his audience knows he's not just joking. Because even though the words are wrapped in humor, the seed is planted, the same way it was planted when he pressed Navy pilots on tic-tac UFOs or gave Bob Lazar hours to tell his story about secret propulsion systems at Area 51. And Rogan knows exactly what he's doing. His listeners don't demand answers. They crave the ride. They want to feel the electric shiver of standing at the edge of what might be possible. And in that space, speculation thrives, because if you were sending probes into another solar system, wouldn't you disguise them as natural? Wouldn't you make them look like chunks of rock or ice? The kind of things no one questions, objects that slip past astronomers with only a shrug, unless, of course, one day one of those rocks behaves just a little too neatly, accelerates when it shouldn't, carries no water when it should, and follows a trajectory that seems too perfect to chalk up to coincidence. Suddenly, the idea of a designed probe doesn't sound so far-fetched, not when you place Atlas beside Oumuamua. And Rogan, always careful to note the pushback from scientists, still reminds his audience that the so-called natural explanations have gaps wide enough to drive a spaceship through. He'll say with a grin, "If the smartest people in the world are still scratching their heads, you can't blame the rest of us for wondering." And that's when the conversation shifts from curiosity to unease, because if these aren't random wanderers, if Oumuamua and Atlas are part of a pattern, then they aren't just rocks. They're visitors, and visitors imply intent. And that's where it gets darker. The chilling question isn't just what are they, it's why now? Because what unsettles people most about Atlas isn't just its mass or its eerie carbon dioxide halo. It's its timing, its precision, the way astronomers have already mapped its flight plan with uncanny clarity. October 3rd, 2025, a sweep past Mars within 29 million kilometers, close enough for orbiters to snap high-resolution images. Then just weeks later, December 17th, a knee passed by Earth at 223 million miles. Not a collision, but close enough for every major telescope to strain at it. Before it slingshots past Jupiter in early 2026 and disappears into the black, almost like a pre-planned reconnaissance mission making its rounds before vanishing into silence. Rogan can't let that go, because rocks don't usually act like that. Rocks don't enter, observe, and exit on tidy schedules, but spacecraft do. And when he half-jokes, that sounds like a reconnaissance run. The laughter in his voice doesn't erase the weight in the words. It amplifies it. Orbital mechanics. Scientists insist, explain everything. Gravity pulls, momentum carries, end of story. But the optics, the story told by the Bay facts, sound like something else entirely. Like a flyby mission built to gather data, dip close enough to observe, then vanish before anyone can get too close. Add in the statistical oddity. Before 2017, not a single interstellar visitor was confirmed in all of recorded history. And then within less than a decade, we get 3, Oumuamua, Borisov, and now Atlas, with 2 of them defying categories in dramatic ways. Scientists say our detection tools simply got better, but the human brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't see improved senses, it sees patterns. It asks why now, and Rogan, unfiltered, voices that unease directly. What if these aren't accidents? What if they're missions? The implication lands heavy. Not that Atlas will crash into Earth, but that it might be here to observe, to scan, maybe even to communicate in a language we don't yet recognize. And that thought lingers, especially when you realize its path brushes Mars, then Earth, as if ticking off planetary waypoints. Why skim so close to inhabited worlds at all, unless the flyby itself was the point? Why align so neatly with the orbital plane when millions of chaotic paths were available? To astronomers, chance is enough. To Rogan's audience, it sounds like choreography. And here his tone shifts. The jokes fade, the half-smiles vanish, and the what-ifs hang heavier. Because if Atlas and Oumuamua are timed, if they are not accidents but deliberate arrivals, then we aren't talking about cosmic debris anymore. We're talking about strategy, and strategy implies intelligence. Rogan lingers there, almost uncomfortably, admitting it's easy to laugh at wild theories when the stakes are low, but harder when the evidence comes with telescope data and orbital charts, harder when the timing itself feels sharp, purposeful, unnerving. Suddenly the line between natural wonder and calculated intent blurs, and that blur is the part that unsettles him most. Maybe this is what first contact really looks like. Not glowing sources in our skies, but silent objects drifting close, watching from the dark, leaving us with more questions than answers. And then the unease deepens, because science can't fully close the gaps. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Yes, but ordinary evidence behaving extraordinarily is what we're left with, and that's enough to make people shiver. A giant mass with no water but plenty of carbon dioxide. Possible, but strange. A trajectory aligned almost too cleanly with our solar plane. Statistically rare, but not impossible. To scientists, these are curiosities within the rules of physics. To the public, they are stories, and stories grip harder than equations. That's why Rogan resonates. He doesn't sell certainty, he sells possibility. He doesn't need to say this is aliens. He only needs to say, what if it is? And the audience fills the silence. And beneath it all, Rogan admits his own greatest fear isn't aliens, it's ignorance. Again and again, he returns to the same point. How little we know, how fast Oumuamua slipped away before we could focus on it, how Borisov was caught but not pursued, how Atlas now drifts past. Immense, enigmatic, glowing oddly, and all we can do is watch from afar. No intercept missions, no probes, just speculation, just helplessness. We're basically standing in our driveway while something the size of a city cruises by, he says, and that image lingers. A species proud of its Mars rovers and space telescopes, reduced to gawking as interstellar mysteries drift past beyond reach. And that helplessness, that realization that the universe will hand us locked safes and we don't even have the tools to try opening them, unnerves him more than any alien theory. Because if Atlas is natural, it forces us to rewrite cosmic statistics, to accept that interstellar wonders are common and that Earth lives in a galactic shooting gallery. But if it isn't natural, if the probe idea holds even a sliver of truth, then it means humanity isn't alone. It isn't ignored. It is being watched, maybe studied, maybe catalogued, and that flips the story of our place in the cosmos on its head. For Rogan, that possibility is both thrilling and terrifying. He thrives on asking the questions no one else wants to ask. But this time, Atlas makes him pause, makes him admit that the laughter masks a deeper unease. Because when science leaves gaps, fear seeps in. Not fear of monsters, but the colder fear of realizing how little control we have over the narrative. And that's the weight Rogan leaves hanging. Maybe Atlas is just a rock. Maybe it's a probe. Maybe it's something in between. But whatever it is,